The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless downpour that turned the narrow dirt road leading to the abandoned Blackwood Mansion into a muddy river. The mansion itself loomed in the distance, its Gothic spires piercing the low-hanging clouds like jagged teeth. The estate had been empty for decades, ever since the last of the Blackwood family vanished under mysterious circumstances. Locals whispered about curses, about strange lights seen in the windows at night, and about the eerie silence that seemed to envelop the property no matter the time of day. But none of that deterred Eleanor Carter. She was a historian, a woman of logic and reason, and she had come to Blackwood Mansion in search of answers. The Blackwood family had been prominent in the 19th century, known for their wealth and influence, but also for their secrecy. Eleanor had spent months researching the family, piecing together fragments of their history, and she was convinced that the mansion held the key to unraveling the mystery of their disappearance. The front door creaked open with a groan that echoed through the cavernous entry hall. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Eleanor stepped inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam of light revealed a grand staircase, its once polished banister now warped and splintered, and a chandelier hanging precariously from the ceiling, its crystals dulled by years of neglect. She moved cautiously through the mansion, her footsteps echoing off the walls. The place was a labyrinth of rooms, each one more decrepit than the last. But it was in the library that she found what she had been searching for. The library was a vast room, its walls lined with shelves that reached up to the ceiling. The books were old, their spines cracked and faded, and many of them had been reduced to little more than piles of dust. But it wasn't the books that caught Eleanor's attention. It was the desk in the center of the room. The desk was ornate, carved from dark wood and inlaid with intricate patterns. It was the kind of desk that belonged to someone important, someone who valued their privacy. And on top of the desk, partially hidden beneath a layer of dust, was a leather-bound diary. Eleanor's heart raced as she picked up the diary. The leather was cracked and brittle, but the pages inside were surprisingly well preserved. She opened it to the first page, and her breath caught in her throat. The handwriting was elegant, the kind of script that spoke of a bygone era. But it was the words themselves that sent a chill down her spine. To whoever finds this diary, know that what you are about to read is not meant for the eyes of the uninitiated. The secrets contained within these pages are dangerous, and to uncover them is to risk everything. Proceed with caution, for the society watches even now. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned the page. The next entry was dated October 12, 1892. The society has made its decision. The ritual must be performed and the gateway must be opened. The consequences are unknown, but the rewards are beyond comprehension. We have waited centuries for this moment, and we cannot afford to fail. The words were cryptic, but they sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. She flipped through the pages, each one filled with more entries, each one more unsettling than the last. The diary spoke of a secret society, of rituals and sacrifices, of a gateway to another world. It was the kind of thing that belonged in a horror novel, not in the real world. But as Eleanor read on, she began to realize that this was no fiction. The Blackwood family had been involved in something far darker than she had ever imagined. And as she turned the final page, she found a note written in a different hand that made her blood run cold. The gateway is open. The society has succeeded, but what they have unleashed cannot be controlled. They thought they were gods, but they were wrong. And now, we are all in danger. Eleanor closed the diary, her mind racing. She had come to Blackwood Mansion in search of answers, but now she had more questions than ever. Who was the society? What had they done? And what had they unleashed? She didn't have time to ponder those questions. A noise from somewhere deep within the mansion snapped her out of her thoughts. It was a low, guttural sound, like the growl of an animal, but it was coming from inside the house. Eleanor's flashlight flickered, and for a moment, she was plunged into darkness. When the light returned, she was no longer alone. Standing in the doorway of the library was a figure, shrouded in shadow. It was tall, too tall to be human, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as the figure stepped into the room, its movements slow and deliberate. She backed away, clutching the diary to her chest. The figure didn't speak, but its presence was overwhelming, a suffocating weight that pressed down on her from all sides. She could feel its gaze on her, cold and unyielding, and she knew that she was in danger. But before the figure could reach her, the flashlight died, plunging the room into darkness. Eleanor stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the figure moving, its footsteps echoing in the darkness, but she couldn't see it. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. The room was silent once more, the only sound the pounding of Eleanor's heart. She didn't wait to see if the figure would return. She turned and ran, clutching the diary tightly in her hands. She didn't stop until she was outside, the rain soaking through her clothes and the cold wind biting at her skin. As she stood there, gasping for breath, she realized that she had stumbled onto something far bigger than she had ever imagined. The diary was more than just a historical artifact. It was a warning, and now it was in her hands. But as she looked back at the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The society, whatever it was still out there. And they knew she had the diary. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. The diary sat on her kitchen table, its cracked leather cover seeming to pulse with a malevolent energy under the dim light of her apartment. She had tried to convince herself that what she had seen in the mansion was a trick of the light, a figment of her imagination fueled by the eerie atmosphere of the place. But deep down, she knew better. The figure in the library had been real, and the diary was real too. She spent the early hours of the morning poring over its pages, her fingers trembling as she turned each one. The entries were written in a variety of hands, some elegant and flowing, others hasty and erratic. But they all spoke of the same thing, the society. The society, as far as Eleanor could piece together, was a secret organization that had existed for centuries, its members drawn from the elite of society, wealthy industrialists, powerful politicians, influential scientists. They were a group of individuals who believed they were destined for something greater, something beyond the confines of the mortal world. And they had found a way to achieve it. The diary spoke of a ritual, a complex and arcane ceremony that would open a gateway to another realm. The details were vague, but it was clear that the ritual required sacrifices, human sacrifices. The Blackwood family had been deeply involved, their mansion serving as a meeting place for the society's members. The final entry, the one that had chilled Eleanor to the bone, suggested that the ritual had been successful. The gateway had been opened, but at what cost? As the sun rose, casting a pale light through her apartment windows, Eleanor realized that she couldn't keep this to herself. She needed help. But who could she trust? The society had been powerful, its members influential. For all she knew, they still were. And if they found out that she had the diary? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Eleanor froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, she approached the door, peering through the peephole. Standing outside was a man in his late 30s, dressed in a dark suit. He had a sharp, angular face and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through the door. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She didn't recognize him, but there was something about him that set her on edge. "Eleanor Carter?" the man called through the door. His voice was calm, almost soothing, but it did nothing to ease her nerves. "Who's asking?" she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "My name is Victor Langston. I'm a historian, like you. I've been researching the Blackwood family for some time now. I believe we have a mutual interest." Eleanor hesitated. She didn't trust this man, but he knew about the Blackwoods. And if he was telling the truth, he might be able to help her make sense of the diary. After a moment, she unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see him clearly. "How do you know about the Blackwoods?" she asked. Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been following their trail for years. I know about the society, Eleanor. And I know about the diary." Her blood ran cold. "How do you know about the diary?" "Because I've been looking for it," he said simply. "May I come in?" Eleanor hesitated again, but curiosity got the better of her. She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Victor's eyes immediately fell on the diary, still open on the table. "You found it," he said, his voice tinged with something that might have been awe or hunger. "Do you realize what you have here?" "I'm starting to," Eleanor replied cautiously. "But I don't know what to do with it. The things it talks about, they're insane." Victor shook his head. "Not insane. Dangerous. The society is real. And they succeeded in opening the gateway. But something went wrong. The ritual didn't go as planned." "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Victor's expression darkened. The gateway wasn't just a doorway to another realm. It was a doorway to something else, something that shouldn't exist. The society thought they could control it, but they were wrong. Whatever came through, it wasn't what they expected. And it's still out there. Eleanor's mind raced. The figure in the library. Had that been what came through the gateway? And if so, what did it want? "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you have the diary," Victor said. "And because you're in danger. The society may have disbanded, but there are still those who believe in their cause. They'll stop at nothing to get the diary back." Eleanor's stomach churned. She had known, on some level, that the diary was dangerous. But hearing it from someone else made it all too real. "What do we do?" she asked. Victor's expression softened. "Just a little. We figure out what the society was trying to do, and we make sure they can't do it again." Over the next few days, Eleanor and Victor worked together to decipher the diary. It was slow, painstaking work, but they began to piece together the society's plans. The ritual they had performed was designed to open a gateway to a realm they called the Beyond, a place where the laws of nature didn't apply. They believed that by tapping into the power of the Beyond, they could achieve immortality, unlimited knowledge, and ultimate power. But the ritual had gone wrong. The gateway had been opened, but it had also unleashed something, a being or perhaps a force that the society had not anticipated. The final entries in the diary spoke of chaos, of madness, of members of the society disappearing or dying under mysterious circumstances. And then, abruptly, the entries stopped. They must have realized they couldn't control it, Victor said one evening as they sat in Eleanor's apartment, surrounded by notes and books. They tried to close the gateway, but it was too late. Whatever came through, it's still here. Eleanor shivered. And the figure I saw in the mansion could have been one of them, Victor said grimly. Or it could have been something else entirely. As the days passed, Eleanor began to notice strange things happening around her. Her apartment, which had always felt safe and familiar, now seemed to be filled with shadows that moved when she wasn't looking. She would hear whispers when no one was there, and sometimes, out of the corner of her eye, she would catch a glimpse of something that shouldn't be there. Victor noticed it too. "They're watching us," he said one night, his voice low. "The society, or whatever's left of it. They know we have the diary, and they're not going to let us keep it." "What do we do?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Victor's expression was grim. "We finish what they started. We find a way to close the gateway permanently." But as they delved deeper into the diary, they began to realize that closing the gateway wouldn't be easy. The ritual required specific artifacts, rare and powerful objects that had been scattered after the society's collapse. And even if they could find them, performing the ritual would be dangerous, potentially deadly. "We don't have a choice," Victor said. "If we don't close the gateway, whatever's on the other side will keep coming through. And it won't stop until it's consumed everything." Eleanor nodded, though her heart was heavy. She had never asked for any of this. She had just wanted to uncover the truth about the Blackwood family. But now she was caught in something far bigger than herself. As they prepared to leave in search of the artifacts, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. And as she packed the diary into her bag, she couldn't help but wonder if they were already too late. The first artifact was a silver amulet, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe under the light. According to the diary, it had been in the possession of a man named Elias Graves, a wealthy industrialist and one of the society's founding members. Graves had died under mysterious circumstances shortly after the ritual, and the amulet had been lost, or so the diary claimed. Eleanor and Victor tracked the amulet to an antique shop in a small town on the outskirts of the city. The shop was tucked away in a narrow alley, its windows clouded with grime. A bell jingled as they stepped inside, the sound echoing through the cluttered space. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a hunched back and a pair of thick glasses perched on his nose, eyed them suspiciously. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice raspy. "We're looking for something specific," Victor said, his tone polite but firm. "A silver amulet, etched with symbols. It belonged to Elias Graves." The shopkeeper's eyes narrowed. "Graves, you say? That's a name I haven't heard in a long time." He shuffled behind the counter, rummaging through a drawer before pulling out a small, velvet-lined box. "This what you're after?" He opened the box, revealing the amulet. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. It was exactly as the diary had described. The symbols seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. "How much?" Victor asked. The shopkeeper's lips curled into a sly smile. "For you, $1,000. Victor didn't hesitate. He pulled out a wad of cash and handed it over. The shopkeeper counted it quickly before sliding the box across the counter. "Pleasure doing business with you," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. As they left the shop, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced over her shoulder, but the alley was empty. Still, the sensation lingered, a prickling at the back of her neck. The second artifact was a dagger, its blade forged from a metal that seemed to absorb the light. The diary claimed it had been used in the ritual to draw the blood of the sacrifices. It was said to be cursed, imbued with a dark energy that drove its wielder to madness. They found the dagger in the possession of a private collector, a reclusive man named Reginald Hargrove who lived in a sprawling estate on the edge of the city. Hargrove was reluctant to part with the dagger, but Victor's charm and a substantial sum of money eventually persuaded him. "Be careful with it," Hargrove warned as he handed over the dagger. "It's not just a weapon. It's alive in a way." Eleanor shuddered as she took the dagger. The metal was cold, unnaturally so, and she could feel a faint vibration emanating from it, as if it were humming with some hidden power. The third artifact was the most elusive, a crystal orb said to contain a fragment of the beyond itself. The diary provided only a vague clue as to its location, a church in a remote village, long since abandoned. The journey to the village was arduous, the roads narrow and winding, the landscape desolate. The church stood at the edge of the village, its steeple crumbling, its walls overgrown with ivy. The air was thick with the scent of decay. Inside, the church was dark and silent, the only light filtering through the cracked stained glass windows. The altar was empty, save for a single object, the crystal orb. Eleanor approached the altar cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. The orb was smaller than she had expected, no larger than a grapefruit, but it radiated an intense energy. As she reached out to take it, a voice echoed through the church. "You shouldn't be here." Eleanor spun around, her breath catching in her throat. Standing in the doorway was a figure cloaked in shadow. It was the same figure she had seen in the mansion. Tall, too tall to be human, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Victor stepped forward, his hand gripping the dagger. "Stay back," he warned, though his voice trembled. The figure didn't move. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," it said, its voice a low, guttural growl. "The gateway must remain open. It is the will of the beyond." Eleanor's mind raced. The figure wasn't human, it was something else, something that had come through the gateway. And it was trying to stop them. Victor lunged forward, the dagger flashing in the dim light. The figure moved with unnatural speed, dodging the blade with ease. It struck out, its hand, or what passed for a hand, grazing Victor's arm. He cried out in pain, dropping the dagger as he stumbled backward. Eleanor didn't think. She grabbed the orb and ran, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the figure behind her, its footsteps echoing through the church. She didn't stop until she was outside, the cold air biting at her skin. Victor followed close behind, clutching his arm. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice strained. They didn't speak as they drove away from the village, the orb resting in Eleanor's lap. She could feel its energy, a faint hum that seemed to resonate with something deep inside her. That night, as they prepared for the ritual, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The artifacts were laid out on the table, the amulet, the dagger, the orb, each one radiating a faint, otherworldly light. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Victor's expression was grim. "We don't have a choice. If we don't close the gateway, it's only a matter of time before whatever's on the other side comes through." Eleanor nodded, though her heart was heavy. She had never asked for any of this. But now she was caught in something far bigger than herself. As they began the ritual, the air around them seemed to grow heavier, the shadows deepening. The symbols on the amulet glowed with a faint light, and the dagger hummed with a dark energy. The orb pulsed, its light growing brighter with each passing moment. But as they reached the final step of the ritual, something went wrong. The orb's light flared, blindingly bright, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. Eleanor felt a surge of energy, a force that seemed to tear at her very soul. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The light faded, the roar subsided, and the room was silent once more. Eleanor looked around, her heart pounding in her chest. The artifacts were gone, reduced to little more than dust. But the gateway, was it closed? Victor's voice broke the silence. "It's done," he said, though his tone was uncertain. But as Eleanor looked at him, she realized that something was wrong. His eyes, they were glowing, just like the figures had been. "Victor?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, his movements slow and deliberate. Eleanor watched him go, her mind racing. The ritual had worked, but at what cost? Victor was gone. He had walked out into the night without a word, his eyes glowing with that unnatural light, and he hadn't returned. Eleanor waited for hours, pacing her apartment, her mind racing with questions. Had the ritual worked? Had they closed the gateway? And what had happened to Victor? The artifacts were gone, reduced to ash, but the diary remained. Eleanor flipped through its pages, searching for answers, but the entries were as cryptic as ever. The society had succeeded in opening the gateway, but they had paid a price that Eleanor was beginning to understand all too well. As the days passed, strange things began to happen. The shadows in her apartment seemed to move when she wasn't looking, and she would hear whispers in the dead of night, voices that spoke in a language she couldn't understand. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, but deep down, she knew better. The ritual had done something to her, something she couldn't explain. And then there were the dreams. They started the night after the ritual. Eleanor would find herself standing in a vast, empty landscape, the sky a swirling mass of dark clouds. In the distance, she could see the gateway, a towering arch of black stone, its surface etched with the same symbols that had been on the amulet. And standing in front of the gateway was Victor. In the dreams, Victor looked different. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes glowed with that same unnatural light. He would turn to her, his expression blank, and speak in a voice that wasn't his own. "The gateway must remain open," he would say. "It is the will of the beyond." Eleanor would wake up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. The dreams felt too real, too vivid, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were more than just dreams. A week after the ritual, Eleanor decided she couldn't wait any longer. She needed answers, and there was only one place she could think to look: Blackwood Mansion. The mansion was just as she remembered it, dark, foreboding, and filled with an oppressive silence. She stepped inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, and made her way to the library. The desk where she had found the diary was still there, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. But the diary wasn't the only thing she found. As she searched the room, her flashlight beam fell on a hidden compartment in the wall, concealed behind a loose panel. Inside was a stack of papers, yellowed with age, and a small, intricately carved box. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened the box. Inside was a ring, its band made of the same strange metal as the dagger, its stone a deep, blood red. She slipped it onto her finger, and immediately felt a surge of energy, a connection to something vast and ancient. The papers were letters, written by members of the society. They spoke of the gateway, of the power it promised, and of the price that had to be paid. The final letter was from Elias Graves, written just before his death. "The gateway is not what we thought," he wrote. "It is not a path to power, but a prison. The beyond is not a realm of gods, but of monsters. And they are hungry." Eleanor's blood ran cold. The society had opened the gateway, but they hadn't understood what they were dealing with. The beyond wasn't a place of power, it was a place of darkness, of entities that fed on the souls of the living. And now those entities were here. As she left the mansion, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The shadows seemed to follow her, stretching and twisting in ways that defied logic. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest, but the feeling only grew stronger. When she reached her car, she found Victor waiting for her. He looked different, pale, almost ghostly, his eyes glowing with that same unnatural light. But there was something else, something in his expression that sent a chill down her spine. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hollow. "You shouldn't have come back." "Victor," she replied, her voice trembling. "What happened to you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing against hers. The touch was cold, unnaturally so, and she felt a surge of energy, a connection to something vast and ancient. "The gateway is still open," he said. "And it's calling to you." Eleanor's mind raced. The ring on her finger pulsed with a faint light, and she could feel its energy, a connection to the beyond. The ritual had worked, but it hadn't closed the gateway, it had only weakened it. And now, the entities on the other side were reaching out, trying to pull her in. "What do they want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor's expression darkened. They want what they've always wanted, a way into our world. And they've chosen you. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She had thought the ritual would end the nightmare, but it had only made things worse. The gateway was still open, and the entities from the beyond were growing stronger. And now they were coming for her. That night, the dreams returned. Eleanor found herself standing in front of the gateway, the black stone arch towering above her. Victor was there, his eyes glowing, his expression blank. "You can't fight it," he said. "The beyond is calling to you. It's in your blood." Eleanor woke up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. The ring on her finger pulsed with a faint light, and she could feel its energy, a connection to the beyond. She knew what she had to do. The gateway had to be closed, no matter the cost. But to do that, she would have to face the entities from the beyond, and the darkness within herself. Eleanor stood at the edge of the forest, the ring on her finger pulsing with a faint, rhythmic light. The gateway was close, she could feel it. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist around her, as if alive. She had spent days preparing for this moment, poring over the diary and the letters she had found in the mansion, trying to understand what she was up against. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality of what lay ahead. Victor had warned her. "The beyond isn't a place," he had said, his voice hollow and distant. "It's a state of being. Once you cross the threshold, there's no coming back." But Eleanor didn't have a choice. The gateway was still open, and the entities from the beyond were growing stronger. If she didn't close it, they would consume everything, her world, her reality, her very soul. She took a deep breath and stepped into the forest. The trees were ancient, their gnarled branches twisting together to form a canopy that blocked out the sky. The ground was soft and damp, the air filled with the scent of decay. Eleanor moved cautiously, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, but the light seemed to be swallowed by the shadows, as if the forest itself were resisting her. As she walked, she began to notice strange things. A faint whispering in the air, like voices speaking in a language she couldn't understand. The feeling of being watched, even though she was alone. And most unsettling of all, the way the trees seemed to shift and move when she wasn't looking. After what felt like hours, she reached a clearing. In the center stood the gateway, a towering arch of black stone, its surface etched with the same symbols that had been on the amulet. The air around it shimmered, as if the very fabric of reality were bending and twisting. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the gateway. She could feel its energy, a pulsing, malevolent force that seemed to resonate with the ring on her finger. The closer she got, the stronger the connection became, until it felt as if the gateway were calling to her, pulling her in. She hesitated, her mind racing. Once she crossed the threshold, there would be no turning back. But she had come too far to stop now. Taking a deep breath, she stepped through the gateway. The beyond was nothing like she had imagined. It wasn't a place, not in the traditional sense. It was a vast, endless void, filled with swirling clouds of darkness and flashes of light that seemed to defy logic. The ground beneath her feet was unstable, shifting and changing with every step, and the air was thick with a suffocating energy. And then there were the entities. They were everywhere, their forms shifting and changing, impossible to comprehend. Some were humanoid, their bodies twisted and distorted. Others were shapeless masses of darkness, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They moved with a strange, fluid grace, their movements both mesmerizing and horrifying. Eleanor's mind reeled as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The beyond wasn't just a realm, it was a living, breathing entity, and she was standing in its heart. As she moved deeper into the void, she began to hear the whispers again, louder now, more insistent. They were calling to her, urging her to give in, to let go. The ring on her finger pulsed with a fierce light, and she could feel its energy, a connection to the beyond that was growing stronger with every step. And then she saw him. Victor was standing in the distance, his form shimmering and indistinct. His eyes glowed with that same unnatural light, and his expression was blank, as if he were no longer in control of his own body. "Eleanor," he said, his voice echoing through the void. "You shouldn't have come." "I didn't have a choice," she replied, her voice trembling. "The gateway has to be closed." Victor shook his head. You don't understand. The gateway isn't just a doorway, it's a prison. The entities you see around you, they're trapped here, just like I am. And they're hungry. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. What do you mean? Victor's expression darkened. The society thought they could control the beyond, but they were wrong. The entities here feed on the souls of the living. That's why they opened the gateway to lure people in, to feed on their energy. And now they've chosen you. Eleanor's mind raced. The ring on her finger pulsed with a fierce light, and she could feel its energy, a connection to the beyond that was growing stronger with every passing moment. The entities were watching her, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light, and she could feel their hunger, a vast, insatiable void that threatened to consume her. What do I do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor's expression softened just a little. You have to close the gateway. But to do that, you'll have to break the connection. The ring, it's the key. But once you remove it, there's no going back. Eleanor looked down at the ring, its stone glowing with a fierce, blood-red light. She could feel its energy, a connection to the beyond that was growing stronger with every passing moment. But she also knew that Victor was right. If she didn't break the connection, the entities would consume her and then they would move on to her world. Taking a deep breath, she reached for the ring. The moment her fingers touched the stone, the void around her erupted in chaos. The entities surged forward, their forms shifting and changing, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, urging her to give in, to let go. But Eleanor didn't falter. She pulled the ring from her finger and immediately felt a surge of energy, a connection to the beyond that was severed in an instant. The ring fell from her hand, its light fading as it disappeared into the void. The gateway began to collapse, the black stone arch crumbling into dust. The entities screamed, their forms dissolving into nothingness as the void around her began to shrink and fade. Victor's form shimmered and faded, his expression one of relief. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You've set us free. And then he was gone. Eleanor woke up in the forest, the gateway nowhere to be seen. The ring was gone and the connection to the beyond was severed. She was alone, but for the first time in weeks, she felt at peace. The gateway was closed. The entities were gone. And she had survived. But as she stood there, staring at the spot where the gateway had been, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching her. The shadows seemed to move when she wasn't looking, and the whispers were still there, faint but insistent. The beyond was gone, but its influence lingered. And Eleanor knew that she would never truly be free. Eleanor returned to her apartment, her body aching and her mind numb. The forest, the gateway, the void. It all felt like a distant nightmare, something she could almost convince herself hadn't happened. Almost. The ring was gone, the gateway was closed, and Victor was free. But the cost of that freedom weighed heavily on her. The first few days were a blur. She slept fitfully, her dreams filled with shifting shadows and glowing eyes. When she was awake, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The whispers were still there, faint but persistent, like a radio tuned just slightly off station. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, but deep down, she knew better. The beyond was gone, but its influence lingered. A week after her return, Eleanor decided to visit the Blackwood Mansion one last time. She didn't know why, perhaps she was looking for closure, or perhaps some part of her still hoped to find answers. The mansion was just as she remembered it, its Gothic spires piercing the sky like jagged teeth. But as she stepped inside, she realized something was different. The air was heavier, the shadows deeper. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. She moved cautiously through the mansion, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, but the light seemed to be swallowed by the shadows as if the mansion itself were resisting her. When she reached the library, she found the desk where she had first discovered the diary. But the diary was gone. In its place was a single sheet of paper, its surface covered in elegant, flowing script. To Eleanor Carter, the note began. You have closed the gateway, but the beyond is not so easily defeated. The shadows remain and they are hungry. The society may be gone, but its legacy lives on. You have seen the truth and now you must decide, will you fight the darkness or will you succumb to it? Eleanor's hands trembled as she read the note. The society was gone, but its influence lingered. The shadows, the whispers, the feeling of being watched, it was all connected. The beyond had left its mark on her and now it was calling to her. That night, the dreams returned. Eleanor found herself standing in the void once more, the swirling clouds of darkness and flashes of light surrounding her. The entities were there, their forms shifting and changing, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. But this time, they didn't attack. They simply watched, their expressions unreadable. And then she saw him. Victor was standing in the distance, his form shimmering and indistinct. His eyes glowed with that same unnatural light, but his expression was different, softer, more human. "Eleanor," he said, his voice echoing through the void. "You've done what no one else could. You've closed the gateway, but the fight isn't over." "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Victor's expression darkened. "The beyond is gone, but its influence remains. The shadows, the whispers, they're a part of you now. And they're growing stronger." Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. "What do I do?" Victor's expression softened. "You have to fight it. The shadows will try to consume you, but you can't let them. You have to hold on to who you are." And then he was gone. Eleanor woke up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers were louder now, more insistent, and the shadows in her apartment seemed to move when she wasn't looking. She knew what she had to do. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor threw herself into her work, trying to distract herself from the whispers and the shadows. She spent hours in the library researching the society and the beyond, trying to understand what had happened to her. But no matter how much she learned, the whispers remained a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked within her. And then, one night, she found it. Hidden in the back of an old, dusty book was a single sheet of paper, its surface covered in the same elegant script as the note she had found in the mansion. It was a ritual, a way to banish the shadows and silence the whispers. But it came with a warning. The ritual will banish the shadows, but it will also sever your connection to the beyond. Once it is done, you will be free, but you will also lose the knowledge and power that the beyond has given you. Choose wisely. Eleanor's hands trembled as she read the note. The ritual was her only chance to be free of the shadows, but it came at a cost. The knowledge and power she had gained from the beyond, the ability to see the truth, to understand the hidden forces at work in the world, would be gone. But as she sat there, staring at the note, she realized that she didn't have a choice. The shadows were growing stronger, and the whispers were driving her to the edge of madness. If she didn't do something soon, she would be consumed. The ritual was simple, but it required one thing: the ring. Eleanor didn't have the ring. It had been lost in the void, but she had something else: the diary. The diary was a connection to the beyond, just like the ring, and it would serve as a substitute. She performed the ritual in her apartment, the diary open on the table in front of her. The symbols on its pages glowed with a faint light, and the air around her seemed to grow heavier, the shadows deepening. As she spoke the final words of the ritual, she felt a surge of energy, a connection to the beyond that was severed in an instant. The whispers stopped, the shadows receded, and for the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt at peace. But as she sat there, staring at the diary, she realized that something was different. The symbols on its pages were gone. The words faded to nothingness. The diary was blank, its connection to the beyond severed. Eleanor's heart ached as she realized what she had lost. The knowledge, the power, the ability to see the truth, it was all gone. But she was free. And as she looked out the window, the first light of dawn breaking through the darkness, she knew that she had made the right choice. The shadows were gone, the whispers silenced. She was free. But as she turned away from the window, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching her. The shadows were gone, but their influence lingered. And Eleanor knew that she would never truly be free.